Live. Here we go. So now, now it does its thing. And let's see. Where is my? Oh, we still have 5 minutes.
I have a message that the meeting is now streaming on Facebook.
Great, we're live then. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. And we're just like for this is like a special thing for our people who are just joined. They want to see what's behind the scenes. You know, that there are that kind of people. You know, they're you describe them as people who are behind the camera or something like that. But there are people who just want to know. Well, let's pull back the curtain and see what's behind the scenes. And so, as a little kind of trick, I like to do that for people. And so, hello everyone, and welcome. This is the Filipino American National Historical Society pre-show. You know, you hear a lot about these programs that like the Super Bowl. You know, they have a pre-show and or actually they have a pre-show and they have a pre-show and then the show starts. Oh, but it's not the game. It's not the game. But and so this is like the pre-show, and you see my guest who appears on the box here, Amanda Upson. Hi, Amanda. Okay,
Hi, everyone.
Amanda says hi, and we have we're going to talk to Amanda because she is a producer of the documentary "The Legacy of the Fighting Filipinos," and I thought it would be a nice thing to introduce on our Sunday brunch, our Filipino American National Historical Society Sunday brunch. I thought though before we get to Amanda, and Amanda, you're thank you for being here. We had to get through our tech stuff, but I wanted to get to some things that this is the first weekend of Filipino American National History Month, and so a few things before we get to our discussion about the legacy of the fighting Filipinos, because you want to hear it. It's all about Filipino women warriors, and I thought, they get short shrift, and we got to give them their due. And I recall doing a story on NBC News Asian America 6 years ago, or actually 4 years ago, on Magdalena Leonis, and I realized that I'd done a story on this on one of the women warriors, one of the Filipino warriors. If you recall Magdalena Leonis, she was a Filipino World War II Silver Star recipient who aided MacArthur, and she died. She lived in the Bay Area. She lived in Richmond, California. So her story is part of this idea of that she was a, a, a fighter, a woman fighter in World War II. We rarely hear about them. And this documentary makes amends by talking about all the women, well, not all, but many of the women warriors. I was privileged to tell the story of Magdalena Leones on NBC News Asian America back on July 5th, 2016. Go ahead, look it up. Go ahead, Google that. You can. It's a good story, decent story. You hear about what Magdalena Leonis did. She did intel, but as we'll find out from the documentary, a lot of these women weren't just intel. They weren't just like women getting secrets and then passing it on to MacArthur. They were doing the duty of the men, in camo. I don't even know if they were wearing camo. I mean, I don't even know what the uniform was for these women warriors, but we'll find out when we talk to Amanda, and it will be. I think it'll be an interesting conversation when we start. But in the meantime, look, yesterday we had a great conversation with San Francisco State College of Ethnic Studies professor Dan Gonzalez. And if you'll recall, we were talking about the news of the day, the illness of the President of the United States, and putting it into context of Filipino American history, putting it into context so that we can understand it. Filipino Americans who, according to the latest National Asian American Voter Survey, are kind of split when it comes to favorability on Trump. And Dan and I talk about that. And You should listen to that that I was going to call it a column, but it's not a column yet. It's more a conversation on Facebook Live. It is on the FANHS Museum page, but according to the AAPI data, the split is Filipinos who find favor with Trump, about like 40%. It's the second highest Asian American group after the Vietnamese, and we talked about that. Maybe it was the Vietnamese who had a kind of allegiance to the Republican Party because of during the Vietnam War and Nixon and all that, but which doesn't exactly make sense, except that the military that came over in exile were supportive of the Republican Party. So maybe that's why you see the Vietnamese very, very supportive of Trump. But I don't know. I think maybe there might be a generational difference too among newer members of the Vietnamese community who were born here in America. That's something to consider. But after that, it's the Filipinos. Why? I don't know. I mean, you can tell me, but historically, we have the data that shows that Filipinos 46 to 40, Biden, Trump in terms of favorability, according to the AAPI data. And it shows that maybe what we're seeing in our Filipino American political evolution is we're seeing very similar to the kind of split that we saw with Marcos anti-Marcos in the 60s. Perhaps. I mean, it's just an interesting thing to look at. It's part of our history. And I know that a lot of you out there are considering, well, what does this mean now for my vote? What am I, how am I going to vote if the president is sick? There's a lot of very, uh, a lot of Filipinos who are supportive of Trump. Should they go ahead and vote no matter what? I mean, ironically, I know a lot of people in Cleveland who are doctors who work at the Cleveland Clinic who were very supportive of Trump. I wonder what they felt like when they saw Trump not wearing a mask or his supporters being, not wearing a mask and watching him, and how he took his views on mask wearing. And then the whole idea that then this is reported that Trump was late, could not be tested to go in, before the debate. He came in, it was too late for testing and just went ahead. And maybe is now that there's this timeline dispute about the president and how sick he was, or if he was sick at all, but maybe he was asymptomatic and still contagious. You got to go back. If they say Thursday night is when we first heard that he had the coronavirus, you could go back, several days to his flights to Minnesota, his visit to New Jersey. Is the president a super spreader, and what kind of behavior does that show you about the commander in chief? So a lot of questions. Check out the conversation I had with Dan Gonzalez yesterday, because we do talk about this thing, and then he talks about something else interesting. Two things. This preamble to the actual show that we'll do with our guest Amanda Upson, who is listening to all this. We talk about the significance of Filipino American History Month, October 3rd. And we mentioned how the immigration of Filipinos exploded with the signing of the 1965 Immigration Act. And wouldn't you know it, it was the anniversary of the Immigration Act on October 3rd yesterday. And Dan and I talk about that. And the significance, of course, is that from 1934 to 1965, with that Immigration Act, the limitation on Filipino immigration was about anywhere from 50 to 150 Filipinos a year. 50 to 100, that's it. That's not even a trickle. That's like one family, I think, But because of the 65 Immigration Act, 20,000 Filipinos suddenly were allowed in. And if you want to see the population boom in Filipinos, it's because that act. And as Dan and I discussed, a bipartisan act. I mean, as I mentioned, you can't even get, well, the only thing you can get a bipartisan thing on Congress right now is for maybe the naming of a post office. And maybe if you name the post office after someone's favorite dog or something. I mean, that's how how nonpartisan or how partisan the world has become. But in 65, look what happened. They passed something like the Immigration Act and they said, come on in, Filipinos. 20, that's a significant thing. October 3rd, a significant thing about Filipino American History Month that we celebrate in October. It's not just because my birthday is coming up, but I mean, Larry Itliong's birthday is coming up too, but we're celebrating it because all these things happened. The first Filipinos, October 15th, who were on that Spanish galleon and found themselves in Morro Bay. That's a story we'll get into later on in the month. But kicking off the month, I don't think you heard anyone except our show yesterday talk about October 3rd being the anniversary of the 65 Immigration Act. A massive, massive piece of legislation, not just for Filipinos, but for all the other groups that had these unfair quotas placed on them. Because before they were looking at European immigration coming in, and they put a limit on the Asians. And remember, there there was this history of Asian exclusion, from the Chinese exclusion to the what should be called the Filipino Exclusion Act, which was the 1934, uh, the Tidings-Duffy Act, essentially excluded Filipinos, and then the exclusion of all the other Asian American groups throughout history. You got to take your hat. If you have your hat, look, you notice I got my hair cut, so I'm not wearing the tabao, but we must honor that Immigration Act. And if only we could pass something like that now, how significant that would be? That would be major. That would be major if we could get that sort of thing happening now. Anyway, so those are some notes on our pre-show. We have a few minutes before I introduce Amanda, and she's she's very politely listening. But man, I hope this is kind of interesting still to you. Your story is going to be interesting. Amanda has an interesting story. She's going to tell the story about the making of this documentary. Let me just say one more thing. Filipino American History Month, as I mentioned, it's my birthday month, but that's not the important thing. But on my Facebook page, if you go to my Facebook page, you'll see my contribution activity, or my plea for a contribution to the Help the Museum. The museum is still closed today, but we like to do this thing, the Sunday brunch, I call it, or these pop-ups, the virtual pop-ups. We like to do it because it's a way that we connect with you, you connect with us. You say, Emil, come on, you're in San Joaquin County, and didn't they just drop from purple to red? So you could be open now, right? Yeah, I know we could be open now, but we're a volunteer organization. We got to go through some training. We got to get our PPE. I don't think we have all our PPE yet. And once we do, we are going to open. We are going to open, but we are connecting still virtually. We've been connecting virtually with these programs. You can go see some of our collection online at the FANHS Museum website. You can go to the FANHS Museum Facebook page, and you can check out what we've got there in terms of I think we started doing this about 5 weeks ago, because we said, hey, everyone's live streaming. We should be live streaming too. So we're live streaming, and I'm glad, because now I don't have to edit it. No, that's not true. I like to live stream because we're in touch. This is a way that we're connected to you. So check out my Facebook page at Emil Guillermo, and you can see my hair before I got my haircut. You say, oh, wow, if we're getting a haircut, we'll contribute to the museum, because now we can see your. Now you're not wearing that getup, that tabao. No, I still like the tabao. I still carry it around with me, but I don't wear it. Don't have to. My hair stays in place. But consider the museum. Look, we had to go virtual. We've been virtual since March. We've been shut down since March 15th. So we are anxious to be open, but still, a lot of people are all over the place. I mean, Amanda, you're in what part of the country, Amanda?
I'm in Denver. So,
Okay,
I mean, it's quite a treat for me to be able to join you from Denver. And I think, there's been some bright spots that have come out of having to go virtual, which is you can reach audiences and people who might not have been able to come in person in your facility.
right. And that's the thing. I mean, it would be great if everyone once a year says, you know, I mean, really, it would be great if once a year everyone says, we're going to go to the Filipino American National History Museum because it's in Stockton and we're going to make it a pilgrimage at least once a year. Is that too much? Once a year to Stockton? Okay, maybe it's too much. Maybe once a lifetime. How about once in a lifetime? How about just during every other Filipino American History Month in October? Then you can say happy birthday to Emil if I'm still around. But there needs to be that thing so that if you're in Denver, like Amanda is, or if you're in Chicago, in Florida, in Washington D.C., in New York, just come visit us, or watch our connect with us. This is the way we connect in with you, and you connect in with us. Put your comments on the chat box. Let's do this. I mean, I like to say the museum is where you are, because as I say in my contribution, my fundraising note, if you go to Emil Guillermo, my personal Facebook page, look, we were shut down. We still had to pay the rent, and our landlords didn't go virtual. Our landlords, they stayed very, very physical. They didn't beat us up or anything, but they stayed very physical and said, hey, pay the rent. We pay the bills. We're good that way, and we stay afloat. And I like to say the museum is where you are. Through this connection, you keep us alive so we can tell your story. We can tell your Filipino American story. I mean, that really is what the museum is about. We're here to tell. And we're not stuffy academic. Look, if you're a stuffy academic, I love your stuffing. I love your whole thing. Really, it's good. You got the credential. That's important. My late lamented friend, Professor Dawn Mabalan, who everyone is remembering now throughout FANHS because she died tragically a couple of years ago. We remember her, but she was as credentialed as it gets. Stanford, PhD. She was teaching at San Francisco State. She had this great book, Little Manila's in the Heart. We remember her, and that was kind of the future. That was where things were going. That we have a young generation of Filipino American scholars who are looking at our history. But that's one segment of FANHS. There's the other segment of FANHS, which is the rest of us 4 million Filipino Americans here in this country who say, we got a story. You got an immigration story. Did your father come from your mother? Did she come from the Philippines? How did they get here? How did they marry? Did you go to school here? Did you go to a good college? Did you go to a good high school? How did your parents buy their first home? These are all questions, all part of how the community developed. And it's part of our history, part of our culture. So we're here to tell your story. So help us tell your story here at the Filipino American Filipino American National Historical Society Museum. We do these pop-ups every Saturday and Sunday. Yeah. How do you not have a life, Emil? No, not during COVID. I don't have a life. But we're telling these stories, and we have these guests. And today's guest, I think I've talked right up to 12 o'clock. Today's guest on the Sunday brunch is Amanda Upson, who is a she is a fighter. She's fighting for Filipino Americans and telling the Filipino American story. Although, as you can see, Amanda Upson you're not Filipino, are you, Amanda? You should unmute yourself there, Amanda.
I am not. But you know what? I think it's not necessarily a good testament. To be able to look at somebody. I have a lot of friends who are white appearing who are half Filipino, and you wouldn't know.
Yeah, well, I'm not.
Yeah, I'm not Filipino.
I'm not saying that that's a good thing. In fact, The best Filipino player in Major League Baseball history is half Filipino, Tim Lincecum of the San Francisco Giants. And when he screwed up, I said, well, I mean, maybe the white genes. That's what screwed up. But no, I only mention it because you have this interest in the Filipino American story, and I just wanted to explain it to people who are watching this live why you have this interest in working on this documentary series, or it's not a series, it's a full documentary film, the legacy of the Fighting Filipinos. What got into you that said, hey, this is a story that must be told?
Well, if you don't mind, before I answer that question, I want to make sure I thank you for having me on. It's quite an honor to talk to you at the beginning of Filipino American History Month, and to be featured on a FANHS pop-up video. I think you guys, you all are doing great work, and I think it's important to capture all of these stories of Americans, and I wish that your audience extends past the Filipino Americans who are watching this Facebook Live and gets to more mainstream audiences. That's what we want for the film, because I think everybody should know this history, and there's been a little bit of a disservice through the media because we're not telling these stories, which is why I signed up. For this project.
Yeah. So there are a lot of, I mean, I mentioned one story, Magdalena Leonis, and I mentioned her because I wrote about Magdalena in 2016 on NBC News Asian America. Go ahead, Google it afterwards. You can Google it. But Magdalena Leonis is on our wall featuring Filipino American women at the museum. And she was a she was a Filipino fighting, helping side by side in intelligence, helping MacArthur. Now, that's one person, but you found all these other stories. How did you do it? And when you found these other stories, what made you say this has to be told?
So I came to this project. Tammy, our director, was working on this project, and she had been working on it for a little bit. And it started with a mystery of paintings that she found, and she started trying to uncover this mystery, and had done some research and ended up getting connected with Major General Taguba and Phil Vet Reps, and it was paintings from the Bataan Death March, and so she started doing her research and investigating that story. And then I came in and I thought, yeah, this is a story that has to be told. So when we started the story, it was focused on Filipino World War II vets, and it was a really broad story, and we kept pushing it, and in doing the research and finding the archives, we realized that there was quite a story of the female guerrillas that hadn't been told, and we cover it in our film. Our film's inclusive. We also cover male World War II vets, but I think if we didn't shine a light on these Filipino guerrillas, I think people need to hear the story. It was service to the U.S. World War II efforts, and it was side by side with male soldiers.
So let me get this straight. You initially started this, and you were talking to General Antonio Taguba, one of the illustrious, Filipino Americans from Hawaii. Did the Abu Ghraib hearings. He's really a hero to the community. And you were just going to do something on the veterans story, right? Just all the vets. But then the women's story stuck out. Why is that? How is that?
So as we started, well, first there's a story, which is that many mainstream audiences do not know this story at all, which is so problematic to me because I grew up in southeastern Virginia, near a Filipino community with Filipino friends. I knew of this service, and it was a little surprising to me that other people didn't. So that's the first part of the story, which is catching mainstream audiences up on this history that your audience already knows. And then as we kept digging and doing the research, we realized, that there is a problem with the denial of benefits. The history of not providing benefits to the soldiers is a problem. And then when you dig into why they're not getting benefits, you start to see this. I think it's a systemic racism and discrimination, and it disproportionately affected Filipino World War II vets in comparison to every other World War II vet. And within that group, it impacted women even more.
So you started out looking at the Filipino veteran story, and this is the one distinction. I've covered this story, and I always like to make the distinction that there were veterans from here who lived in the United States, and they joined the regular army, and they got their benefits because they were in the regular army. We're talking about the Filipinos who answered the call of Roosevelt to come fight side by side, and they were fighting for the Filipino Scouts. They were fighting for the Filipino forces, and then later they became USAFFE, the United States Armed Forces, in the Philippines. And they're the ones who, through the Rescission Act of I forget now what year, but when Truman signed the Rescission
46.
Act, 46, that's right. Then that's it. Then benefits, citizenship, all these things were taken away, stripped away.
Right.
And the fight for being made whole continued from that point until 2009, where there was some money for the veterans to make them whole. Not all, and there's still some discussion about, well, we need some other benefits, but the compromise happened, and it happened with Obama getting it through in 2009. It was something like a $15,000 lump sum, right, for Filipinos here who happened to immigrate from the Philippines to here, and if they stayed in the Philippines, they didn't get as much, but they got some money. And that's where we are right now. Now, you discovered there are Filipino women. How are the Filipino women left out?
So the first issue is, with the people who could apply in 2009, of those, I think it's something like 56% were denied, which is more than any other ethnic group. So I think, when you look at that, you have to wonder what's going on and why is that. And when we did our research and we found an attorney who was representing some of these veterans and pushing their case forward. The central issue comes down to you have to be on this official registry, and the official registry was reconstructed post World War II, and on the face of the official registry, it says this document is incomplete. This document doesn't list everybody, and it also says you're not included if you're a woman unless you were an RN. So it automatically reduced any women who were serving and not in the capacity of a registered nurse. They were omitted. Now, what we know through historians, through the footage that we found, is that there were absolutely women serving side by side with their male counterparts. But regardless, the U.S. Army decided that couldn't possibly be the case. And so if right at the beginning of the form it says, "Are you female?" And if you check it and it doesn't say registered nurse right after it, your benefits are denied. So there's no chance at getting any.
So blatantly sexist. I mean, it was already a problem because, and we know this is true for a lot of the Filipino male soldiers, just trying to get the documents. The paper trail is unbelievable, considering how there were very little. Well, there were some documents in the Philippines, and then there was the documents that the Army had here in St. Louis. There was a big fire, so documents were lost.
Right.
So it created this whole, our people, and then there's the whole scandal. Are people selling documents in the Philippines? Are people trying to qualify for the money? So a lot of issues there that made people think, okay, we can't just make these Filipinos whole and give them money. And so this dragged on from 46 to 2009. Imagine that, how long. And, you can, for the dragging on, you can thank people like Nancy Pelosi, as well as some of her other counterparts. It was kind of a bipartisan, you know, uh, drag your feet kind of thing until Obama came along in 2009. But this thing with the nurses, that's a thing. How they couldn't imagine Filipino women. There weren't pictures, or there weren't documents showing
Well,
Filipino women were fighting with guns and out there.
so there's not much. If you can imagine, in World War II, there weren't many cameras pointed at women, um, and there's not much film footage pointed at women. So there's not a lot of historical evidence of them serving. There's some. We've worked really hard to find it, and also if any of your audience has some in their family records, please get in touch with us via our Facebook page, because it's really been an effort to try and put these materials together. But the overall documentation is pretty limited, and I think it just starts from a place of there. My personal position is there's this massive issue with whose story is getting told and who's telling the story, and how aware are they of what they're missing. And I think when you sit down and you write these forms in the government in 1946 to 1949, and you're in an office in St. Louis, maybe you're not conceptualizing that women are serving in combat in the Philippines, because in the U.S. they weren't. So I think it's just a matter of not knowing what you don't know. I mean, it's possibly it was set up nefariously as intentional discrimination. We've learned a lot since the end of World War II. I'm willing to bet that people just weren't thinking inclusive thoughts.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that I think it's 1 in 10
Yeah.
were women.
Well, tell me all right, if they were a nurse, they were able to get some kind of the payments
Wow.
in 2009. But tell
Well, if
me,
you met the criteria.
yeah, if you met the
So you
criteria.
still have a barrier.
Yeah.
You have to have that original U.S. affidavit, and you have to have your name on the registry. So you have to hope that your name wasn't lost through lost records during World War II, that your records weren't destroyed during the fire you talked about, and that your name is clearly yours and not shared with anybody else, and there's not any sort of argument that it's not you listed in the record. So you have to get over all of these barriers. You have to push through all the barriers. And then if you do that and you meet those criteria and you're an RN, then maybe you would get the benefit. But what we know is if you look at everybody who applied, there's a high rate of people not getting it.
All right. So tell me about, let's go back to at the beginning, you were talking about a painting. You're talking about seeing a painting of the Bataan Death March. And this was in someone's collection in their attic or something. And it told the story that led you to, there are all these women out there who are fighters. Tell me about that story.
So a man named Vic had some paintings in his basement. It had been they were in his wife's possession, and he had always held on to them. And when she passed away, he opened up these boxes. At that point, I don't even know if he knew they were paintings, but he opened them up, and there were these 4 paintings. So he started trying to figure out what they were. They're gruesome, horrific paintings that depict atrocities of war. And so he went down the path of trying to figure it out. And when he first approached Tammy, his question was, can you make a documentary about what these paintings are, who painted them, why they weren't publicly available? And Tammy started looking at the story, and she thought, okay, well, that's a mystery, and it's interesting, but that's not the whole story. So those paintings effectively opened the door for Tammy to start the research that started this project. And then once she had started it and told me about it, I got on board. So that's the segue for the painting.
Well, but the paintings were done by women, or did were the paintings? No, the paintings weren't done. But how did you discover that women were actually fighting on the front lines? How did you discover that the women were guerrillas and not nurses?
Our archives research, um, books, experts, just general research, and then confirmed with Seth Watkins, who's an attorney that represents Filipino vet clients. He had one client, Feliciana Reyes, who she had I think it was a 6-year letter writing campaign with the VA to get benefits. She had abundant evidence of her service. She still wasn't getting benefits, and then Seth took on the case. And I think that's sort of what cracked it open, was connecting with him through a PhilVet gold medal award ceremony. And so Tammy connected with Seth, and his research into it, allowed us to realize there's a bigger story here.
Well, tell me about Feliciana Reyes, and how does she represent a large number of women who were fighting Filipino warriors?
Well, we have the nice thing that we have from her is her copies of her letter writing campaign, where she's providing her first person account of her service, and she's providing her documentation that she has of her service, which was pretty extensive and used in the case. And despite that, she's denied benefits, and it comes down to the fact that she wasn't a nurse. So she was a ward attendant, not a registered nurse. And so we use her to focus on the story of female guerrillas, and then tell the larger picture of what female guerrillas were doing in World War II to help the U.S. Army. I mean, they were conscripted with the Filipino forces. And like I said, I think the estimate is 1 in 10 were women. And we have the footage of the women, standing next to their male counterparts. So we know they were there. And
well, what were they doing, Amanda? Oop. I think you're muted. Something happened.
To have this conversation because we just dropped off for a second. Do you still have audio for me?
I have your audio now. Yeah. So tell me what did they do? What did the women do?
Hold on just a second. I'm going to make a little bit of an adjustment. Could you repeat that, please?
So tell me, Amanda, what did the women do when they were fighting, when they were standing side by side with the men in combat?
I honestly, they did the same thing the men did. I mean, it depends on what role they played, but it was. I'm a producer. I'm a documentary producer. I'm a film producer. I'm not an expert in military history. I'm not an expert in Filipino history, but from my research in this, it's pretty clear to me they're doing the same jobs. I mean, it's just like not all men are serving in intel, or not all men are serving as ward attendants. The women were the same, and some were RNs, and others were ward attendants, and others were operating in intel, and others were serving in combat, and people were used in espionage. They're serving the same function as anybody else.
And were they on the front lines with guns, and did they go out and shoot? I mean, were doing everything the men did out in the front lines, really?
Yes.
And do you have footage showing that, or what are some of the stories that the women have told, or that come out in your your documentary?
So we are focused more on the history from after World War II until present day, the struggle to get the benefits, and less on the history of what they did during combat. But absolutely, we have footage of women side by side, doing what you would expect of soldiers during World War II. It's just, there's not much footage of it. There's not many photos. I mean, that's the hard thing. So again, if your audience has that, we would love for you to share it. with us because it'll help augment this history and collect it.
Well, there should be, well, there may be a shortage of pictures or film. I guess they had if people had a Bell and Howell 70 DR, which is the film camera that they use. It usually ran about a 100 or 200 foot spool of film. But I've seen some images that your documentary shows, and there's women clearly. They're not nurses. They're
Right.
fighters. they're 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 women warriors. And yet, really, they can prove that. That's not the issue. The real issue for our community is the fight to get equity, and equity not just with other U.S. soldiers, but equity with Filipino vets. I mean, the Filipino vets were, you hear their story, their struggle. They were dying, the males, you know, uh, guys like Guillermo Rumagan and, guys at Celestino Almeida, the guys who, whose stories, if you covered the Filipino vet story, them, you say, oh God, they're 90. I mean, I had something, an email from Celestino Almeida, a couple weeks ago that,
Right.
warmed my heart because I've talked to him and he's like the oldest living veteran, and you know how hard it was for him. Now
Right. He
imagine,
just turned 103.
yeah, he just turned 103. You think about
He's
him.
the star. He's the star of our documentary. He's one
Oh,
of the stars.
that's good. That's good to know. But
He's got a great story.
you think about Celestino Almeida, and also I did a story on Celestino. You can look it up at inquirer.net. But you think about him, and then you think about the women. You think about how hard Celestino fought to get his benefits, but how about the women? And some of them still haven't received anything, right?
Right. Many of the vets haven't received anything, and it's an ongoing struggle. I mean, I think the fact that it's been a struggle for 75 years is shameful, and it's because of the Rescission Act. And I think the other thing that's shameful is every year since 1993, when Filipino Veterans Fairness Act has been introduced, it's died in committee. And this is bipartisan legislation that could easily rectify this, and it's not even getting out of committee. And part of what this film does is, tell people about the struggle of that legislation and how to rectify and rehabilitate the harm caused by the Rescission Acts.
Now, this is one of the things that I've covered this story, and I know that a lot of people who've read stories on this, they'll say, "Oh, it was over when the compromise happened with Obama," and the money was paid out to 15,000 to the vets here who came to the United States from the Philippines. They immigrated, but the veterans who stayed, there was a little bit that went to them too. They got their money if they stayed in the Philippines. But and some people thought, "Oh, great, we won the equity fight. It's over." Is it over? It's not over.
It's not over. It's not over for me until there's full recognition of veteran service. It seems terrible to me that vets who served in the Philippines are not able to stand shoulder to shoulder with vets who served in other territories during World War II. It's the same service to country. It should be the same recognition. It should be the same benefits, and they're still shut out, even with the slight rehabilitation under Obama. I mean, it's better than nothing, but it's really an incomplete solution.
So, what are the prospects of going forward? Now, you still need, you hope that the documentary tells the story. What's how soon before the I've seen a trailer, um, and if people want to see a trailer, we'll put it up on the Facebook site of the museum. But where what when do you think the documentary will be released? I know that you have some kind of cut right now, right?
We are closing in on picture lock. So once we once we have post production done, we'll be able to be at picture lock, and then we can start talking more to distributors. When it's out, I won't know. We're pushing very hard because we would like to see still surviving World War II vets be able to see this. But you know, we got hit by COVID just like everybody else. We had to we lost shoots. We can't safely access subjects. We are forced to make this major pivot, and we're trying to fundraise in the midst of COVID and an upcoming presidential election. You know, we have everything going against us, but we've managed to get it to almost a picture lock, so we're close. And then it's just a matter of, you know, we could be finished very quickly. Honestly, it's a matter of funding so that we can get through the workflow that we've lined up. And our goal for this is access to mainstream audiences, because the shame here is that most of the American public does not know this history, and they should. It's an American history. I don't know why it's not taught. I do not know why people don't know it, and our aim is to change that.
Well, what gets me is that a lot of the Filipino American community really got behind the Filipino veterans movement, say the last, I would say since, you know, maybe the last 25, 30 years. I mean, if you go back to Clinton, you know, you began to hear, you know, the
Right.
community say equity, equity now. And, you know, that's a generation, right? That's, that, you know, to get to where we are now, I think, like I said, in 2009, people thought it was over. You know, oh, we have equity, we won, and then they turned the page. And if you look at where the Filipino community is now in terms of, well, what are we fighting for? What is the history? What is the, you know, what is the cause that comes out of our community? And I think that there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of disparate causes right now. You know, we'd like to see the community do better in education and healthcare and, you know, those sort of things. But it wasn't as focused as it was, say, 30 years hence with, you know, equity for the veterans. And maybe it's time for the Filipino American community to renew a sense of, hey, it's not over. Because I know maybe 75% of the people who hear this will say, didn't the vets get their pay?
No, they. What we know is that 56% of them were denied, and those were of the small number of people who were able to apply for benefits in a very short window. So, uh, and the ongoing issue, I mean, part of my struggle is I reach out to veterans organizations every day to try and get them behind this project and supportive, but it's a non-starter for them because I'm talking about a population that's not considered veterans of U.S. military, and this is the problem. I can't get that support until I get them to buy into the history and the education that they don't know. So I don't think it's over. I think it's over when a majority of the American population knows the history and recognizes the service of these vets.
Yeah, you know, it's funny that it is this non-starter. If people don't count the women as veterans, as true veterans, they say, look, we got enough problems. And even when I talk to veterans activists, uh, they're happy with, some are happy with the compromise. Some continue to push for some of the other benefits, you know. But if they get VA, if they get citizenship, if they get a little lump sum, they're happy. But I think the other thing you're fighting is many of these veterans are willing to take that compromise because they're in their late 90s to early 100s. You're fighting the clock.
Yes, and COVID
And COVID.
COVID has added extra pressure. But I think the long term benefit is ultimately the goal is repeal of the Rescission Act, which happens through passage of this Filipino Veterans Fairness Act, and I think the way that that happens is to get mainstream audiences aware of the issue and pushing on their members of Congress for change to get it out of committee and get it passed. It's crazy to me. It's a bipartisan. It's the last. I think it might be the last remaining bipartisan issue that everybody can
Yeah.
align on, and here it dies. It dies in committee.
Well, the thing is, I think, look, we know the fight for veterans equity was a fight to make the veterans whole. And that's the key. It was not a fight to repeal the Rescission Act, but the Rescission Act, despite the veterans being made whole with that 2009 payment, the Rescission Act still stands.
Right.
Well, why is it important to, if the veterans are made whole, what is the significance of going all the way and getting rid of the Rescission Act and taking that down? I mean, it doesn't really serve as a precedent, does it?
I well, I think it's important, and I should also recognize. I mean, you gave me a window, and I started talking about something else before, but obviously, many people were fighting this issue long before we came in and started making the documentary. And there was the push during Clinton's administration. We have John Milagrito and Marie Blanco have been working
Right.
on this for a long time. Obviously, Major General Taguba and his PhilVet rep is working, and they pushed and got the gold medal award ceremonies for vets. So there have been a lot of people working on this. We are one of many and recent people. But why go after the Rescission Act? I think it's important because as an American, I don't want something on the books that totally denigrates the service of an entire population of people who served. Also, I would like it in the history books. I mean, there is importance in recognition and telling a full history, and I think that's a bad. The Rescission Act was bad. It served everybody, and it should be repealed. And it's a pretty simple. I mean, I think it's just a slight grammar change invalidates it, and that's what the bipartisan legislation seeks to do.
Well, it's kind of interesting to me because I never really considered that undoing the Rescission Act would be that important if the veterans were made whole. But in a way, I see that. Well, why would you want this monument to, you know, why would you want this anti-Filipino, monument existing in terms of this legislation? That's not this act, this law. Why would you want it still in the books? I mean, there's a case to be made for it, and I think your documentary could make that case if it's heard or seen by not just the Filipino American community, but through the mainstream. So uh, I'll
Right.
I'll
Could you
give you.
imagine? I'm
Go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you got me all excited. I think, okay, we've seen this record number of racism against Filipino Americans in recent years. And what would have changed if other Americans knew that they participated in World War II? We revere our vets, right? It changes the story, it changes the narrative. And I feel like removing that legislation helps to change the narrative, and it helps to change people's perceptions. And that's what I would like to be a part of.
Yeah, it is true. This was the one big lie, right? It started with, FDR, Roosevelt saying, "Come join us. Here's what we want you to do. Come, answer the call." Filipinos in the Philippines answered the call. Filipinos here in the U.S. didn't have. They answered the call because they were already in the U.S. They could join the regular army. So and a lot of my relatives who came in the 30s and 40s, I think there was a little, it was unclear about, the Filipino vets and who they were, right? There were the Filipinos there and the Filipinos here. And the Filipinos here always they never fought for equity. They always had equity.
Right, right.
It's the Filipinos there that never had equity. And they're still not and those who came here, immigrated subsequently, they're Filipino Americans. That's the bridge, right? That's why it's important to the Filipino American community, because a lot of them didn't stay in the Philippines. They came here and, worked after their guerrilla days. And some of them died here. Some of them continue to live here. They're Filipino Americans. So
Right.
it
And
something needs to be done for them. But when, like I said, when the compromise happened, it was like, okay, we got it. Every equity done. And I think that's kind of the eye opener for me. I didn't realize that. Is it that important to continue to fight for the absolute repeal de facto by giving money and benefits to the veterans? You've kind of repealed the Rescission Act without repeal. You've actually not done the heavy lifting, but you've thrown money at the problem, and now everyone's supposed to be smiling and happy. But I mean, I guess there are a few people who aren't smiling and happy. I mean, besides you, there's got to be some, right? I mean, there's some people who are not happy with the fact that it played out this way.
that are you asking if people are not happy that veterans didn't get benefits,
Yeah.
or that?
Yeah, I'm asking, is there still, because it seems to me that a large number of our communities is happy with the way the compromise, you know, occurred. And is there a large number of Filipino Americans, in the community who are still fighting?
Well, I think there's definitely people who are, because we see the support of Phil Vet Rep. We see the need for the gold medal recognition ceremonies. We see the Filipino vets who've been fighting for recognition this entire time, with the uptick in the um, 80s, late 80s, and 90s. So yeah, I mean, I think if somebody has been adversely impacted by not getting benefits, I would expect they would be upset. I don't. I think both of my grandparents, my grandfather served in World War II, um, and they got benefits afterwards, and those benefits impacted my family going forward. And I think for the majority of those who served in Filipino forces, they were denied that benefit going forward. So there was an absolute, I would be angry about that. I think there are a lot of benefits you get when if somebody says, yes, I'm going to risk my life to serve this country, they should be at a minimum recognized, and paid and provided benefits. And then we have the promised citizenship. And I would imagine there are quite a few people who are upset about it, and probably because it's been, you get exhausted after fighting for 75 years, who have probably moved on, and their families who have probably, decided to get on with their lives and not have it, um, be a daily burn to their psyche. But I think it's got to be there.
Yeah.
It's wrong.
Yeah. Well, it's now been about 11 years since that 2009 compromise. And I just think it's now a matter of engaging the community, letting them know, because if some people realize, hey, your grandma was entitled to this, your grandma didn't get it, or your
Right.
mom, or wherever you are in the legacy. But I think if people realize, oh, that's what the picture was in our family album of your nana or your Lola, she was. That's why Lola knew how to shoot a long rifle. She was because she shot it in World War II, and that's why she never liked to do what we thought women should do once she immigrated here in America, because she was a fighter. I mean, there's a lot of things that people who hear this can now look back and say, well, we know that she was fighting, but we thought she was just a nurse, but maybe she wasn't a nurse. Maybe she was something else. Maybe she did something else in the army. And maybe this will open up some thought, you know, avenues that people can go back and ask their families and see if maybe their story is part of the story you're telling in the legacy of the Fighting Filipinos. So, Amanda, I is there one last thing you want to tell the audience about the documentary and what they can do?
Yes, I would welcome everybody who's listening to go to our website, which is www.lffilm.com. So it stands for Legacy Fighting Filipino Film.com, and hopefully we can link to it. And you can sign up for our newsletter, which is a great help. You can go to our Facebook page, our Twitter page, our Instagram page. They're all linked on the website, and follow us there. Um, we always need donations. We're looking for businesses who can sponsor us, who want to reach wide audiences. But even if you're not in a position to support financially, something that is invaluable is sharing our message on Facebook or on Twitter, sharing on social media, and following. Because what I do as a producer, I take that evidence of audience and I aggregate it when I go out to sales agents or when I go out to platforms to try and sell this movie. So my ability to get it to mainstream audiences is wholly dependent on how I can evidence support of a niche audience or of early support of the film. So please sign up for the newsletter, like us on Facebook, like us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram, and share our message. And part of what we do as well, it's Filipino American History Month. We're sharing the message of FANHS. We're sharing the message of FilVetRep. We're helping get all of these other messages out, and part of supporting our film. Our goal is to also keep that support going for FilVetRep and FANHS and other organizations that have supported us.
Well, we're interested in this in terms of being Filipino American history and a history that is really seldom told, and we have the the remnants of that history still alive. I mean, we mentioned Celestino Almeida. He's featured in your film. I was fortunate to have interviewed him for some stories I did a few years ago. He's still hanging in at 103. And I just think, like I said, a lot of people thought that story, the vets, is over, but it's not over. And so uh, this is an endorsement of the history of that we're trying to expose. Uh, Not necessarily the film, although I like to see the film, but the history is important, and the facts behind the history. The Rescission Act. If people in our audience didn't realize that the Rescission Act still exists, it was not overturned, it was not done away with, it was not changed, but we got some money, or members of our community got some money. Members of the vets in the Philippines got money, and that's where we are. It's not over. So, for bringing that to our attention, I really appreciate you being on with us, Amanda. And good luck with the film. Stay in touch. We'll continue to talk, and we have a discussion next week planned with the director of the film, just to talk about specific stories about who were these women, and like I said, this is an unusual part of Filipino American history, a history that is still developing. I mean, or is still uncovered, or still covered up, and we're trying to uncover bit by bit for our community to see what's going on. So, Amanda, thank you very much for being with us here on the FANHS Museum pop up, and happy Filipino American History Month.
Thank you. Same to you.
Yeah, really, I appreciate that. And so I'm going to say goodbye to the group. If you enjoyed our program, remember uh, this is our pop up, our Filipino American National Historical Society brunch. We do this pop up every Saturday and Sunday, for you, just because uh, this is our way of connecting with you. Stories, Filipino American history stories, with you. I welcome you to share your stories with me. Email me at filipinomuseum@gmail.com. That's filipinomuseum@gmail.com. Share your stories. I'll get you on a pop up. We'll talk about this. I also welcome you to check out the Filipino or the FANHS Museum fundraiser for this month, for this October, Filipino American History Month. Find it on my Emil Guillermo page or find it on the FANHS Museum page. We're trying to raise money so we stay afloat, so we tell your story. And uh, I just thank you for being here again. We're going to try to get open soon. Hopefully, we're red. We went from purple to red here in San Joaquin County in California. And that gives us sort of the green light to stay open. I think we have a couple more days to see if we can open fully. I think there is like a 10 or 14-day window after we get reduced down to red. If there's no rise, then we can fully open, but we have to fully be prepared with PP and all that. So stay in touch on our Facebook page at FANHS Museum on Facebook. Thank you very much. As always, you can get to all our videos on the FANHS. I'll post it on the FANHS Museum live recording. So if you miss this or any of our other previous FANHS Museum pop-ups, there's a page that has all of them right there on one page. So once again, happy Filipino American History Month. You've been watching us here on Facebook Live. We've had Amanda Upson, The Legacy of the Fighting Filipinos, a documentary, hopefully coming out soon. And that is it. Thank you. Thank you. Have a great, well, see you again next
Thank
week.
you.
Thanks, Amanda. Thank you. And thank you, everyone out there.